Hello and welcome to day 10 of Women in Antiquity. Today we're going to be talking about gender in Athenian classical literature and spending a little bit of time getting a background on Athenian drama, tragedy and comedy, and its role in the expression of gender in Athens. So theater in Athens originates out of the performance of regular festivals that take place in Athens. By the time we get to the classical era, these have been regularized around very specific traditions of dramatic tragedy and focused on annual contests in which playwrights compete to perform the most outstanding tragedy. Later on, comedy is added to this as well, and so the Dionysian festival that takes place every spring involves competitions with 3 slots for tragedies and 1 for comedy. The nature of the original form of expression, tragedy, this starts out as halfway between a sort of a festival situation where you have a sort of a group performance that involves dance and choreography, and the art of the rhapsode that presents a story to an audience in the form of poetic song. The earliest forms of tragic performance involved an individual wearing a mask to represent a character or a type of character who would perform songs and dialogue representing actions and behavior that are responded to by a group of individuals on the stage known as the chorus, who would react to the actions and behavior of the character, and provide together both a physical response in the form of dance, and a vocal response in the form of responses to reactions to the things that the character is saying and doing. And so naturally, this would often take the form of the character performing things that are problematic, that lead to or involve crises, and the chorus responding to them. The chorus, therefore, is often in the position of representing either conventional wisdom or the viewpoint that the playwright is trying to get across, although it often can end up being more complicated than that. For example, we've already seen in the Euripides that the chorus takes the very specialized form of representing the Furies themselves, and are part of the debate that is going on as to what should happen to Orestes. So tragedy is the earliest form, and there's a parallel here in the way that literature evolves in Athens in general. In other words, from the Dark Age, we have the legacy of epic poetry, the original art of the rhapsode, that is grand and sweeping, and that explores fundamental problems of an individual's responsibility to society, and the role of fate, destiny, and the gods in ensuring the success of the community, and in providing justice and retribution against those who betray the community. Those are the grand themes that we find in epic poetry, and these are often the themes that we find in tragedy as well. But as Athens undergoes this series of mutations, this evolution that it progresses rapidly through in the archaic and classical periods, we see that tragedy evolves as well, and starts to reflect the increasingly complex way in which Athenians are exploring the idea of morality and the human relationship with the divine, as well as issues of citizenship, gender, and other essential elements of social bonding. So we have, in terms of the body of material that's come down to us, we have a relatively limited selection. In other words, we have records of plays that are being performed at these annual festivals throughout the classical era, throughout the 5th century, and many of these plays have not actually come down to us. And so, there are a very large number of plays that we know by name only. There are even a number of playwrights that we know only by name. There's also a quantity of plays that we know only from fragments that are quoted elsewhere, that are referred to in other sources. And so, for example, if you remember back to the very first lecture, I used one of these, a quote from Euripides, from a play that does not exist, that talks about that has a character talking about the ultimate role of women in society. And so, what we do have in any kind of substantive quantity is the work of 3 major tragic playwrights: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. And these, fortunately for us, can show us part of this arc of transformation. The earlier of the playwrights, Aeschylus and Sophocles, are all of these people are writing during the 5th century, during the height of the ferment of classical culture in Athens. Aeschylus and Sophocles are writing somewhat earlier in this period, toward the middle of the century, and they are presenting a somewhat more traditional form of the essential concept of the tragedy, which is to say, it deals with a hero who fails in some way, and as a result of that failure, incurs a crisis, incurs a question of justice, which is generally dealt with at the end of the play through the intervention of the gods. This is where we get the phrase "Deus ex machina," in which the issues of the plot of the story are resolved through external intervention by divine force. And the phrase, of course, is literally "Deus ex machina," God from the machine. An individual representing a god is lowered down from a proscenium, or otherwise is introduced in a way that demonstrates supernatural providence. But so, to take the best known example of Sophocles' work, the Oedipus Tyrannos, the story of Oedipus the king. Fundamentally at the heart of the story, this is a story that everybody in the audience would know at some level. In the same way that if you went to a film about Little Red Riding Hood, the people in the audience would know the story. And so the real question is, what is it that Sophocles is saying with this story? How is the story going to be told, and what twists are going to be involved in the path taken along this story? And so in the story of Oedipus, we fundamentally have the problem of Oedipus attempting to sidestep the destiny that has been laid out for him, and as a result incurring catastrophe for himself and for his family. He ends up killing his father and marrying his mother, both of whom he encounters as strangers. So the theme here is the reinforcement of respect toward traditional attitudes, amongst other things. And there are a great many other things involved here. There's an as with Homer, there's there's a recurring issue with pride, and ultimately pride is drawing your energies to yourself instead of bestowing them onto the community where they belong, onto the progress of the community, onto onto developing your own excellence toward the end of driving the progress of the community. And so the pride, hubris, arrogance, all of these things in both epic poetry and tragedy are ways of betraying the community by devoting your energies to yourself or by setting aside consideration for the larger good. And so the original form of traditional tragedy is by and large, essentially traditional. These are stories that deal with morality in a way that reinforces traditional notions, but also explores them and plays with them in situations where the questions are complicated. As we'll see with part of the Oedipus cycle is Antigone, which we'll talk about in a moment. And Antigone, the questions are not nearly so clear cut. And the essentially conservative values that the male figure Creon is trying to assert in Antigone end up reflecting a fundamentally selfish attitude. But more on that in a moment. Euripides develops the tragedy by taking it one step further, reflecting on, as I said in the previous lecture, the shift in the Athenian psyche toward a more responsible attitude toward morality, toward a more nuanced understanding of right and wrong. Euripides is essentially attempting to tell a tragic story in which humans do not need to depend upon the gods to dispense justice. If humans are truly free, and this is the thing that Greeks value in themselves. This is the thing that Greeks fought for in the Persian Wars against the invading Persians. The fundamental problem with the Persians is that because they are barbarians, because they have an emperor, they are all unfree. The Persians are enslaved to their great king from the Greek point of view, and so the fight against the Persians is fundamentally a philosophical war, a war in which the Greeks fight the Persians not merely to protect their land, but to protect their very concept of what it means to be human, what it means to be a citizen. And for that matter, the Persians are invading the Greek territory not because they need to, because it's a huge problem to invade the Aegean world, and the first attempt is a failure that requires falling back and reassessing. But the Persian invasions of the Aegean world at the beginning of the classical era in 490 and 480. The Persians do this in part because the Greek idea of freedom is fundamentally corrosive to the way that Persian society is constructed, and were the Greek idea to diffuse through the Persian Empire, this would cause a corrosion, an acidic breakdown of the fundamental connections of Persian society. The Persians attack the Greeks because the Greek ideas is fundamentally not only repulsive to them, but cancerous. So the Persian invasions are a war in which the two sides are fighting for the fundamental idea of what it means to be a person. And this throws this question into sharp focus for the Greeks, and this is one of the reasons why the century after the Persian invasions is such an intense and concentrated period of ferment, of the explosion of ideas and expression that attempt to explore and confront their basic idea of society, their basic assumptions of humanity, and most of all, the fundamental concept of right and wrong. And so, Euripides is writing in this context, and it infuses his plays in a way that is much more visible than in his slightly older contemporaries, Aeschylus and Sophocles. We see in Euripides more of the sense of the community collectively taking responsibility for its justice, and for individuals seeking answers within themselves and in constant conversation with the people around them of what is the proper course of action, and leaving open more than one possible answer to this question. Comedy develops as even more directly out of this ferment of ideas and expression in classical Athens. Comedy, the comedic plays of classical Athens are not what we understand them to be, what we understand comedy to be today. They take the same form as tragedy, which is to say, by the time we get to the classical era, tragedy involves, two or three individuals on stage who are, representing, various characters wearing masks, and a chorus behind them. Comedy takes the same, physical structure on the stage. It has a very carefully defined structure in terms of the segments of the play itself. But whereas tragedy is exploring traditional morality, comedy is comedy as it's developed in classical Athens is an attack. It is a call to arms against something in contemporary society that is wrong, that needs to be excised, that the people in the audience need to understand is reprehensible and must change now. And this is brought about through ridicule and through the vile and base humor. In other words, this is involving obscene activities and the basest of bodily fluids and all these other things. This is as well as satire, sarcasm, parody, all of the tropes of comedy that you can study in an actual course in literature. Every tool in the playwright's arsenal is brought to bear, both high and low, both sophisticated and vulgar, as a means of bringing the target of the play into disrepute, to make it laughable, to make it obscene, to make it awful, to make it objectionable, because what the playwright is saying is that this thing must end. And so, for example, we see in Aristophanes' play, The Clouds, and Aristophanes is the chief practitioner of this medium that we still have extant in any considerable quantity. Aristophanes writes a play called The Clouds, in which the sophists, the teachers of rhetoric, are depicted as the target, and so every form of ridicule is brought to bear on not only this target but on the hero of the play, who is brought under their tutelage and who is twisted about as a result. The name of the character is actually called Strepsiades, which is a Greek word that ultimately means twisted about. And the reason for this is Aristophanes sees the sophists. The sophists are teaching the ability to argue any side of a question, regardless of its merit. And so this is the ultimate form of relative morality. This is, whatever is right and wrong is whatever you can convince people of. And this is a horrifying prospect to a conservative traditionalist fellow like Aristophanes. And so he writes this play in which he attempts to bring the sophists into the greatest disrepute possible. Now, the interesting thing about this is that he depicts as the leader of the sophists in the play a character called Socrates. And the character, of Socrates in the play is the teacher of the sophists and the greatest exponent of relative morality. The real Socrates, the real philosopher Socrates, had already rejected sophistry and was in pursuit of the opposite idea. Was seeking to discover ultimate truth, universal laws regarding morality, which is the fundamental opposite in the nomos versus physis debate from this this relative morality that is practiced by the sophists. The sophists represent nomos, the idea that people can decide, that convention determines morality. And the real Socrates represents the opposite of physis, the idea of universal truth. But Aristophanes fears the physis side also, because what Socrates is doing is attempting to get at universal truth by questioning custom and tradition, by getting people to break down their assumptions and superstitions in order to get at, to dispense with anything that is irrational and get at what is ultimately true. And so, the real Socrates is attacking the traditions and customs and beliefs that Aristophanes holds dear. And so, in order to target him as well, he, slanderously makes him the ultimate relative moralist. He depicts him in a false light in The Clouds in order to besmirch his reputation. And the tragedy here is that this is successful to some extent. In other words, the depiction of him in The Clouds is one of the things that is understood to lead eventually to the city of Athens arresting him and executing him on charges of corruption of the youth. Aristophanes wrote a considerable number of plays. Only 11 of these have come down to us, and they are striking in their content. There are two that deal very especially with the idea of gender. And so the Lysistrata is very famous for being the play in which the women of Athens seek to call an end to destructive and pointless war by denying sex to their partners. And so this sex strike is quite successful, and this strange and bizarre, this exceptional moment of assertion, this intrusion of women into the public sphere in Lysistrata, results in the restoration of everything back to the way that it should be. The women have to take action in order to rebalance Athenian society and restore traditional social structure and traditional gender bonds. And then the play that is translated into English as either the Assemblywomen or the Congresswomen or Women of the Assembly. It's a word that's difficult to translate because the word is, made up by Aristophanes. There is no word for Assemblywomen, of course, because there are no women in the Assembly. There are no women citizens. But this is a play in which the men of Athens wake up one day to find that the women have taken charge, and they are forming the assembly, and they are making the decisions. And as we would say now, hilarity ensues. But all this is toward for the purpose of satire, to demonstrate that the men have been making increasingly bad choices, that they have been, betraying their responsibility to take care of the men and women and children of Athens. And so, once again, the women are forced to create this impossible situation that would never actually occur, in which they take charge of Athens in order to restore the proper balance. In both of these plays, in other words, women are seen as taking responsibility where men have failed to do so, in order to protect the Athenian community as a whole. Both of these plays are well worth a read to get a handle on how gender is presented in Athenian plays, and especially Athenian comedy. Lysistrata and Assemblywomen, may very well be relevant to your paper, but even if not, it's well worth taking a look at either or both of these plays. The nature and structure of comedy arises, out of the same ultimate source as tragedy. In other words, the festivals in honor of Dionysus. Before the emergence of these formal forms of dramatic presentation. Then we enter the glory period of old comedy, which runs through the whole of the 5th century, in which the fundamental aim of the play is the vilification of some target within society that needs to be brought down using vulgar innuendo as well as everything else. Aristophanes being the chief representative of this form. After 400, and coincidentally or not, so I've mentioned the Peloponnesian War, the great war between Athens and Sparta. The Peloponnesian War takes place between 431 and 404. And so it's many of Aristophanes' plays are being written during the Peloponnesian War and taking place in this very heated crucible in which Athens is fighting for its life against its greatest enemy from within its own culture. In a war that was much longer and more destructive than any war that the Greeks had ever experienced. After the Peloponnesian War, in which Sparta defeats Athens, spoiler alert, a large number of things change. The Greek world of the 4th century is different from the Greek world of the 5th century in a number of very intriguing ways that are beyond the scope of this particular course. One of them is the way in which artistic expression is pursued, and strangely enough, the bite of old comedy is softened, and we enter a period called Middle Comedy, in which comedy is weaker. And then by the time we get to the second half of the 4th century, the rest of the classical period, comedy has become more generalized, more typical of what we think of comedy as being today. The use of stock characters, like the intruding mother-in-law, the ditzy ingenue, the untrustworthy brother-in-law, these kinds of things, and exploration of romantic plots and other things that are not social commentary, but are designed, in a more general way to entertain. And to gently parody the human condition and the broadest brush of how people behave in a goofy fashion. And so fortunately we have a good number of examples of both old and new comedy that can be compared as reflections of human society, and many PhD candidates in Greek literature have done so. What's interesting for us is that the question of gender is addressed in old comedy in some interesting ways, including in the plays that I just talked about. Structure of old comedy, I don't need to talk about this. As I'm talking about drama, and the exploration of ideas, drama is a form of expression that is meant to instill, consideration about the social condition, an individual's relationship to society in its audience. In other words, tragedy and old comedy are not simply about entertaining an audience. They are not things that are thrust at an audience that soaks them in passively, any more than epic poetry is. The performance of the rhapsode that tells the stories of the Iliad. It's all of these forms of expression are meant to invoke and provoke in the audience, and so the rational exploration of the world around us takes place in this collective form in drama, and also takes place in an individual form as philosophy becomes highly prized in Athenian society. And so we see the ideas of Socrates. Socrates himself left no writings for us, and so most of what we know about Socrates comes from the works of his student Plato, who records a number of dialogues of Socrates in which Socrates is interested in interrogating a particular individual, or small group, generally an individual, who is expressing the basic ideas that things everybody knows: conventional wisdom, traditions, superstitions, customs, and Socrates asks a series of questions that break down and unpack these customs and traditions in attempting to discard the things that are irrational, the things that that are not supported by anything, and to try to get at the fundamental kernel of truth and right by discarding everything else. There are a number of very interesting dialogues along these lines. One that is somewhat interesting to look at in terms of some of the things we've talked about in this course is the one called Aeon. This is where Socrates is interrogating an individual whose name is Ion, I-O-N, and Ion is a rhapsode, a rhapsode from the classical era whose role in society is to be the living embodiment of the works of Homer. And Ion claims that he is a repository of all knowledge, because everything that anybody needs to know can be found in Homer, and this includes everything from navigating a sailing ship to leading an army and fighting a battle. All of these things are found in Homer. And so this is the rhapsode representing the fundamental role that Homer has in forming the basis for Greek understanding of themselves in the world. The first thing that everybody learns is Homer, and Homer itself is in the Dark Age what's the stories that became the written works of Homer are what in the Dark Age bound and connected the culture of Hellas together and helped to create this collective amongst all of these rival communities. And so, Socrates has a grand old time breaking down all of Aeon's assumptions and calling into question, what we can really understand about society based on the storytelling inherent in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Plato also writes an apology, the apology of Socrates, which is apologia is a word that means sort of defense. The apologia is Socrates' final speech before he is executed, before he drinks the poison hemlock. And the apology is a summation of what Socrates believes in and what he feels is his contribution, his duty to Athens is in challenging conventional wisdom and bringing forth new knowledge. And this is in some ways the credo of philosophers from that day to this. In other words, philosophers are divided into pre-Socratic and post-Socratic, and from Socrates onward, there's an understanding that philosophy is practiced along these lines and for these kinds of purposes. Plato also writes a very famous work called The Republic, which is his own exploration of the nature of the universe. And as a student of Socrates, he believes in the fundamental idea of universal truth. He rejects the nomos idea of conventional morality and embraces the idea that there are universal truths that are fundamental to the physical world, that are beyond the whim of humans and gods. But the problem is how to get to them, how to understand them. And so in the Republic, the Republic overall is a description of a utopian society. The Republic is a description is a blueprint for Plato's version of the ideal community. And interestingly enough, it is very functionalized. Everybody in the society performs a particular duty, particular function on behalf of society, and this is true in terms of gender as much as anything else. Everybody has a specific role, and that role is inherited. It is. There's no social mobility. This is society is a mechanism that in order to function at all must function in exactly this way, which already gives us a sense of a certain pessimism on Plato's part as to the chances of achieving any kind of workable society. Plato is responding to the world around him. And the Athens, as Athens has become during and after the Peloponnesian War, and seeing it in a negative light. After all, Athens is the city that is supposed to be the most advanced city in the world, and they're the ones that executed the greatest mind that had ever come to the Greeks, Socrates. And at the heart of the Republic is the Allegory of the Cave. The Allegory of the Cave talks about the human condition, and he essentially says that ordinary humans are trapped in a world of shadows that they mistake for reality. and they are shackled in this. They know nothing else. They experience nothing else, and they have no sense that the false forms that are being presented to them are anything other than what is true. And these are variable and changeable. These shadows represent the sort of arbitrary conventional morality and irrational traditions that that saturate human society. This is all anybody knows. And so there is a true light, true right and wrong, true justice lies outside of this cave. And so there are two problems. One is to gain the insights that it is possible to break free of your chains, to find your way to the outside, to understand this light, this truth. And the human mind, trained as prisoners in the cave, is not suited, has been mistreated in such a way that it is difficult even to apprehend what it is that you're looking at, even if you have gained the outside world and seen the sunlight. The process of making your way to the outside world and then understanding what it is you have experienced there is a long, hard road of education and self-exploration. But the most striking part of this is that once you get there, you are no longer, you have no way of communicating these insights, these revelations, to the prisoners that are still in the cave. If you go back to the cave and try to explain your enlightenment to your former fellow prisoners, they will have no idea what you were talking about. And so the ultimate upshot of this, in terms of the Republic, in terms of Plato's blueprint for the ideal society, is that the Republic, this utopian Republic that Plato devises, is ruled over by a hereditary set of individuals that are bred to be philosopher kings. That the people at the top of society have gained the insights that comes from enlightenment, and they are the only ones that truly understand, right and wrong, understand justice, understand, the nature of the universe, and so everyone else just has to do as the philosopher king tells them. As you might sense, Plato takes a somewhat dim view of democracy, and takes takes a direction toward everything about social bonds that creates a fixed hierarchy with only the enlightened at the top, the ultimate philosophical form of tyranny. All right, so the readings. Pomeroy's chapter this week is much more concrete. There's a lot to talk about in terms of women in Athenian literature, and so this is a useful chapter that explores a number of interesting points. The foremost amongst them, and this comes up in some of the other readings as well, that you cannot map these literary figures onto ordinary society any more than you can do with mythology. The stories that are being told in poetry, in mythology, and in drama, in tragedy and comedy, are deliberately designed to be abnormal and to involve characters with exaggerated or unusual characteristics. And so this is particularly true of the women, as we'll talk about in a minute. Antigone and Medea are are extremely unusual figures, and the way in which their stories are brought forth are meant to focus and throw into relief the actual reality that the people in the audience would be familiar with by presenting these extreme examples or these aberrant examples. And so this is a fundamental point. As you're exploring literary figures, you cannot say, people in this story. This is what tells us what things are like for actual ordinary Athenians or anyone else. You have to look at these stories as fiction that is designed to provoke a response in contrast to what people know about their everyday lives. All right, so and so the Antigone, the story of the Antigone involves a number of tragedies having taken place before the play. Antigone has a sister and twin brothers. The brothers had ruled over Thebes, but had quarreled with each other, and one of them ends up, fighting the other, and in the course of this fight, both of them are killed, as well as the son of the man who takes over Thebes after all of this, Creon, who becomes one of the figures in this play. And so Creon bears a grudge against the sons of Oedipus. And so he has decreed that Polynices, the one who broke the alliance with his twin brother, Polynices, who is responsible for the death of Creon's son, should be refused burial rites, and mourning of him is prohibited. And so this story is Antigone, as his sister, as the last remaining family member, attempting, a senior member of the family, attempting to ensure that Polynices receives the proper burial rituals and is properly mourned, and this puts her in the position of being of committing treason against the laws of Creon. And so, first of all, this puts us in the position of having a very interesting conflict between, the laws of men and the laws of God. And this is one of the things that's explored in this story. You can sort of see the way in which the debate over morality informs this subject matter. In other words, what is right to do from Creon's point of view is whatever he says it is. Whereas Antigone is taking a point of view not necessarily in line with Physis, but taking a line that there is a law beyond that of kings. But even more interesting is the depiction of Antigone as being defiant. Rather than submitting to this unjust law, the defiance of Antigone is striking, and the defiance of Antigone on behalf of her family. This is Antigone not acting for herself, Antigone knowing that she will be punished for this. This is Antigone acting on behalf of what is right and proper for her family and for her community. She believes that if Polynices is denied the customary rituals and mourning, that the gods will be angry with the city of Thebes as a whole, and Thebes will suffer. And so Antigone is acting out of a motivation for the community as well as for her family. And there's a connection and relation between these, which is also interesting to explore. And so this is the part of it is the circumstances and meaning of Antigone's strength and defiance, which is on behalf of some larger goal. This is contrasted obviously with Creon, who is acting fundamentally on behalf of his own grudge, his own irrational response to the death of his son, however understandable it is. He knows that there is a danger that Antigone is right and that he is putting his own city at risk, but he can't see past this because he's immersed in his own emotion. And so, powerful emotion is playing on both of these sides, but the one that is acting negatively, that is betraying society because of irrational emotion, is the man, is Creon. The other thing, too, then is there are a number of passages in the Antigone in which Creon says again and again that he will not be ruled by a woman, that he as a man has to be paramount over the women in his community, and this is striking because this is being presented as part of Creon's hubris. This is the quotes in the play in which Creon is saying things like I will not be ruled by a woman. So no women will rule me, polluted creatures submitting to a woman, he says to Hyamon, and so forth. These things are presented as part of Creon's flaw, as Creon's betrayal of Thebes. And this is what is ultimately punished by, the death of all of these members of Creon's family, directly as a result of his own self-obsession. And so, we see a very powerful parallel here. The Creon's refusal to be ruled by a woman is not representative of social norms in which men are held to be superior. Quite the contrary. In this play, they are being depicted as a form of pride and hubris that is responded to, by the gods, by fate, with cataclysm within the life of Creon himself. The Medea is even more controversial. The Medea is, as we've never stopped talking about the Medea, fundamentally what we have here is an unusual figure. Medea is the wife of Jason, that Jason brings back to Corinth. And Medea is an outsider, and this gives her an element of the exotic, gives her an element of the other, and combined with the already, women have because of their, biological differences, have a closer connection to nature, as we've seen explored in some of the articles we've looked at. A woman who is an outsider has a greater level of mystery attached to her, and the ultimate expression of this is to give her an ability to commune with the supernatural. And this is done through Hecate. In other words, Hecate as being an intermediary between the human world and the divine world is someone who facilitates access to the supernatural on behalf of those who are on the fringe of society, who have especially those who are excluded, who have experienced some kind of wrong. And so, Jason brings Medea back to Corinth, and then he decides that, what he really wants is to marry a princess and to be, one of the leading figures of Corinthian society, and this involves casting Medea aside. And Medea is so is so hurt by this, so damaged by this betrayal of the marital bond, this fundamental, this fundamental element of human society, that she wreaks the most horrific possible revenge upon Jason, and that's the murder of the two children that she and Jason had together, as well as the murder of the princess and her father. And so, the way in which this is accomplished is striking, and the speeches that Medea has. Once again, it's worth reading this entire play, but even in this excerpt, the speeches that Medea has are fascinating exploration of how this idea of betrayal and vengeance can be taken to its extreme, and Medea being presented as the absolute ultimate form of the disposition of vengeance. Remember what I said about Euripides, that Euripides does not rely upon the gods to dispense vengeance. And in this case, vengeance is coming through Euripides, through Medea, in a way that is much that has much greater ramifications for other humans than the simple dispensing of justice by the gods. And it involves, for Medea, the ultimate sacrifice. In Jason's eyes, Medea becomes a monster, inhuman. But Medea, from her point of view, is accepting the ultimate sacrifice in order to wreak the ultimate vengeance. And the end of the play, as we see depicted on this urn, sees her, ascending out of the human society of Corinth, on a flying chariot, leaving, Jason to live with the aftermath of what Medea has done, which Medea all along says is the responsibility of Jason, so that it is Medea who says to that it is Jason that ultimately killed these children, and she is willing to derive no joy from this. She is willing to become the most wretched of women in order to bring this about. In other words, justice for humans does not necessarily bring about contentment and satisfaction to the parties involved. Even those that are dispensing justice and vengeance must sacrifice to do so, must experience, in many ways, the worst of what is being inflicted on the targets of the vengeance. So this is part of what's going on. The depiction of Medea as a wife, as a mother, as a woman, as a foreigner, as all of these things. Everything that you can say about Medea is true, and the complexity involved of who she is and what she does is one of the most difficult things and involving exercises that you can encounter in Athenian literature. The Foley article is a useful discussion of the general idea of how to approach the understanding of how women are presented in literature, and how we can map that onto an understanding of actual gender in Athenian society. Much of this is done through a discussion of Clytemnestra in particular, and there's also a considerable exploration of how we can talk about what I presented as the relationship of the male to the public and the female to the private. The conclusion that Foley comes to in this is that the simple relationship between the male and the public and the female and the private is upended often in drama, in tragedy, in comedy, and this is for the purpose of understanding what is the norm and how it is violated. And so the simplest form of presenting a conflict between two individuals that is private, that is within their family, and this includes the relationship between Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, between Orestes and Clytemnestra, and so forth and so on. These private relationships can reflect, parallel, and twist the problems that exist in public society. Pythagorean female values, and so if you don't know a lot about the Pythagoreans, there's a good amount of information in here. Essentially, the Pythagoreans are looking to find a rational, reasonable way of living, of constructing a community, and so it's interesting to note that not only are the Pythagoreans not depicting or expecting inferiority of women, but that women possess particular virtues that are characteristic of them, according to the Pythagoreans, and these include things like generosity and bravery, as well as moderation, as well as providing a sort of even keel that can help to ground and smooth out the wildnesses that men can exhibit, and ultimately that that women are the foundation of society by being the foundation of the family and of the marital relationship. Okay, and then and here in the Zeitlin we see a discussion of myth and myth making in the Oresteia, and this even more it becomes even more involved in understanding Clytemnestra, Orestes, and the relationship between them. This takes a somewhat dim view of Clytemnestra as being a woman who is attempting to impose herself into the ordinary male role of being a ruler. And this in and of itself is debatable, but what's interesting is one of the things that Zeitlin is ultimately getting at here is there is a essential dilemma to being a woman, a dilemma, a conflict between the female in her role of mother, which has intrinsically a key kind of power in society and culture, and her role as wife, which involves deference. And so there's a conflict between power and deference. This again, like I said, is debatable. The role of wife, to assume that wife equates with deference, I think is not consistent with all the things that we've been looking at, and fundamentally, what I've been trying to look for in the relationship between wives and husbands is not necessarily equality, but balance, and the kind of relationship that you see between, Odysseus and Penelope. The kind of relationship that you see um, in that was discussed in the Herodotus article. These are the kinds of things that give us a little bit more insight into the role of husband and wife. That it is not one of the husband being the rule maker and the wife doing what she is told. Rather, that the husband and wife take a shared responsibility for the oikos, for the household, and that these responsibilities are complementary. But this is something that, so if you read the Zeitland, you can decide whether what you think of the arguments that are being put forward here in terms of Clytemnestra, in terms of the female dilemma. And in particular, I'm interested in seeing your responses to the Antigone and the Medea, what you think is being told in these stories, and how they reflect upon how these extremes, how these unusual women give us insight into Greek society.